For Brentford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, the AG's report proves again this Prime Minister is not worth the cost or corruption. The report reveals massive corruption at the Green Slush Fund, highlighting the misappropriation of $76 million through 90 cases of conflict of interest. Their directors sat at a table, awarded millions of dollars to their friends and to their own business interests, all the while more and more Canadians are hungry and homeless. The question is simple. What plan does the minister have to get that money back?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative are so allergic to good news that they go to old news, Mr. Speaker. The big news today is 4.75. That's the number that all Canadians will remember. That is the number because we have good economic news. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to answer the same question again. What is a responsible government? It's about lynching and inquiry. That's what we did, Mr. Speaker. And on the basis of the findings, Mr. Speaker, we suspended the funding to the organization. The CEO and the chair resigned, Mr. Speaker. And now we're proposing a new governance model, one with the National Research Council, because we want to restore funding to small and medium-sized businesses in this country, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Everyone has an opinion about Canadian federal politics.
Oh, yeah.
Hey gang, what's up? Just Aaron right here. Another committee investigation. We've got our best, Larry Brock, big-time prosecutor from Ontario. Now he's an MP fighting for Canadians, trying to get back some of our money, try to fix some processes through committee. But we have this IQRA KHALID that is an MP for the Liberals from Ontario that does everything. She is like shameless in how obvious she is in her brutal tactics, which are delaying, distracting, stalling, dividing, just lying, and then if things get to be too much, she just accuses you of being racist or sexist or one of these liberal tactics, which are by now really lame in my opinion. Let's take a look. We've got Rick Perkins. We're gonna follow up IQRA after Brock, IQRA, then Perkins. Rick Perkins is an MP from Nova Scotia here. I know Rick a little bit, and he's impressing me with his actions in Parliament. He definitely has some substance and presence when he's asking questions. Pretty sharp guy. Let's take a look and a listen. Most recent committee video. Here we go. Let's take a peek.
Mr. Brock, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for your attendance today. I'll largely be addressing my questions to you, Ms. McClymont. And I think I want to continue on the thread from my colleague, Mr. Cooper, where he had left off in terms of the process by which Ms. Verschaeren was ultimately appointed as chair. I know you can say hindsight's always 20/20, that reflecting on her finding of guilt under the Conflict of Interest Act ×2, you can say, well, I guess we should have taken some lessons from that and perhaps reinforced the conflict of interest provisions within the hiring sphere. But I guess what troubles me, and I'm sure troubles Canadians, is that there were red flags all over the concept of even entertaining the thought of hiring Annette Verschaeren. Much communication happening from the past president and CEO, and nothing really was done. And I know, Ms. McClymont, you're relying upon the advice and basically saying we encouraged her to obtain information and advice from the ethics commissioner, and clearly she did. But the advice that she received from the ethics commissioner, she didn't follow. Not only she did not follow, but other directors did not follow. Hence, we're in this boondoggle of $390 million of taxpayer funds inappropriately being handed out to companies that were legally not eligible, and for directors basically patting their pockets. So this is leaving a real sour taste in the minds of Canadians as to what kind of shenanigans are going on with Justin Trudeau and his government. He told her point blank, not only do you have to declare a conflict, you must recuse yourself. She didn't do that. On the basis of that, she was found guilty ×2. So I want to go back to the process. You mentioned that there were under 10 applicants who were applying for this position. I want an actual number. And don't rely upon this is a privacy issue, because clearly it is not. I'm not asking for names. I'm asking for a finite number. How many people applied for the position of chair at SDTC?
Mr. Chair, as I've mentioned, there were close to 100 individuals who had applied for the chair position back in 2018.
You told me less than 10.
I was responding, Mr. Chair, I was responding to Mr. Cooper's question about the number on the advice letter that
I
went
see.
forward. That was less than 10.
Well, let's go back. Over 100 applications?
Mr. Chair, I would clarify there were close to 100
Close to
applications.
100. Of that 100, you vetted that down to under 10. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay. What was the number under 10?
Mr. Chair, as I've mentioned, out of respect for privacy and
That's
personal
not good enough,
information-
Mr. Chair. I'll remind you, ma'am, of the supremacy of Parliament and the supremacy of this committee. The issue of privacy does not apply. I'm not asking for names. I'm asking for individuals that were mentioned in this referral letter that went off to the PMO and the minister's office. That is not a privacy issue. And if you claim privacy again, I will seek direction from the chair, because we have a right to demand that number and the documentation that flows from that. So I'll ask you again, out of respect, what is that actual number? I will not accept under 10.
Let me just interject here, just to assist the witness. So Mr. Brock is correct about privacy. Now, we're a long way from asking for any information from that. But I do think he is within his rights to ask for a number. Now, if you need to come back to us with that number, we'll accept that. At least that would be my recommendation. But I do think you need to provide a little more specificity, because there's a lot of numbers under 10. So if you would, please.
So, Mr. Chair, I appreciate your intervention. Our standard is that we don't divulge when it's less than 10, but I appreciate your offer to assess that and come back to the committee. So we will do that. We will check with our counsel and see if we're able to provide the number of names that were provided in the chair advice letter.
That answer is unsatisfactory to me. She's taking this request under advisement and obtaining legal information, legal counsel as to whether she can release that number. Again, I repeat that this is not a privacy issue that can trump the supremacy of Parliament and the supremacy of this committee. I will be asking this witness again to provide that information to this committee, an actual number of individuals that made it on the referral list.
Yeah, I will function here at the direction of the committee now. It is my view that if you have that number, you should provide it to this committee. There is no, from this committee's point of view, there is no legal obligation for us to wait for a response. Out of courtesy, if you don't have that, that'd be one thing, but that's not the answer you gave. It is also unusual for PCO to appear before a parliamentary committee like this. These are unusual circumstances because of this board. I would urge you to provide Mr. Brock with that answer. It does not violate any privacy considerations that you might be under that we are not under. And again, doing so, I think, would be forthcoming to this committee, which I think you should be. It would also steer us away from the committee taking additional steps to require you to provide that information. So I would urge you to provide the number to Mr. Brock, please.
I'm not, to be completely honest, I'm not sure if I have the exact number with me. So I would like to, if, Mr. Chair, if it is possible, if I could just verify and we could get back to the committee with the number, if that's okay.
Is that just for clarity? Is that something you can verify in the next hour, or are you seeking? Okay, that'd be helpful. Thank you. So we'll look for that, and we'll deal with this before noon, Mr. Brock. Mr. Brock, I'm afraid your time is now up. So you'll have another opportunity, I believe. Turning now to Ms. Khalid, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
This is the problem child, IQRA KHALID. She's an MP from Ontario, and who would ever vote for this woman, especially after seeing the way that she behaves and acts? Hard to tolerate, very transparent, easy to see through what this woman is doing. She's lying to Canadians, it would seem, or just distracting, dividing, delaying the process. She just is in the way. She doesn't stand a chance at winning her seat next election. But we just need that election, don't we? Anyways, here's IQRA KHALID stalling things.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And, as I continue to participate in this committee, I always see people, witnesses who spend their time coming in, sharing in good faith information with this committee and being put through the ringer. It's unfortunate, and I obviously encourage continually to my colleagues to please respect witnesses and to respect the legislation under which we are governed. I understand and appreciate the relevance of Parliament in how we operate, but I also want to stress that there are branches of how we operate as a democracy, and that we should act responsibly with the powers and privileges that we are given within our Parliament. Now, Ms. McClymont, you had made reference to production of documents, and as you may know, there was a Conservative motion that had been adopted in the House requiring the production of documents related to SDTC to the law clerk with the intention of providing these documents to the RCMP. Now, the Conservatives are egging the RCMP to start criminal investigations, and I don't think that's fair. It is quite an abuse of the powers that they're privileged to have in our democracy. Now, if I'm not mistaken, as you indicated, PCO plays a central role when it comes to production orders of this type, leading the process and providing guidance to departments. With regards to this production order, multiple offices implicated have raised some serious alarm bells. Earlier this summer, the RCMP commissioner raised the alarm, saying that there were risks that this motion compromised its investigative processes and police independence. Now, in your experience, have you seen a production order from Parliament that compromises institutions' independence in this way?
Mr. Chair, I would just preface that, again, I am a senior official from PCO. To be sure, we are focused on the appointment side of the House. I would say for our part, consistent with my previous comments, we do take very seriously our obligations under the Privacy Act, and we do redact information that is of a personal nature to protect appointees so that they do feel they can come forward and put their candidacy and be protected. And so that is absolutely what we did in this context for our part in senior personnel.
What are the dangers of information, for example, if the candidates their names are released or their general vicinity is released? What are the consequences to those people having seen the kind of dirt and mud that is slung at everybody in our democratic system in terms of applications, in terms of pushing forward the agenda of SDTC and of PCO?
Mr. Chair, I would say we really try to encourage people across the country to apply for these processes. I've over my time in this job, I've heard some very heartwarming stories of people who want to serve very, very much and are very grateful for the opportunity through an open process to do so. If that is breached, then we betray that confidence in people who have put themselves out there, who may not be successful for positions, who come from a very high stature across the country. So it would be very disappointing. It would cast a real chill for people to serve, and there's lots of public commentary these days about people not wanting to serve for a variety of reasons in a kind of heightened public and social media environment. So I would be very disappointed if we were to take steps that would anyway risk confidential information being provided that would hamper or cast a pall on people's interest in applying for positions.
But at the same time, we see that there has been an issue here. There's been a disconnect between the ethics commissioner, the AG, the PCO, with a candidate and their lawyers. How do you think that this transition to the NRC is going to help with increased oversight, for example, of these kind of appointments? What is your office doing to make sure that these kind of disconnects and that general mistrust in the entirety of candidacy that is not impacted?
Mr. Chair, I would say for our part, we will continue to look at ways to strengthen people's understanding of their obligations under the Act. I have spoken to the Ethics Commissioner myself if there's more things we could do in partnership together to make sure that people do understand their obligations, as one member pointed out, not from the beginning, but through the duration of their appointment. And I know the Commissioner does have tools in place to make sure that people are reminded of their obligations, and he offers training and other outreach. So I do think it's quite important, and it's something that we'll absolutely have to reflect on to make sure that people continue to understand their obligations under the legislative frameworks that they operate in.
Brief question if you have one.
It's not brief, so I'll
Then
pass.
we'll
Thank
hold
you.
off. I appreciate that, Ms. Khalied. So, Mr. Perkins, I heard you laugh. That's a lesson you could abide by as well, I think, at times. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor for 5 minutes, and the clock has started. So
That's
don't.
not the first time I've heard that. Thank you. So I just want to be clear. Former Minister Baines testified before committee that he got a letter from PCO with 2 names. Former CEO Leah Lawrence testified before committee that she was told from the minister to vet the 2 names that PCO had given. Both had conflicts. One chose not to put their name forward when asked. The other one said, sure, no problem. And the other one was Annette Vacherian. So I'm a little unclear, since we've had lots of testimony, what the reluctance is to say 2 names are given, since we've had lots of testimony from the former minister, the chief of staff of the former minister, and the former president, that that's what was given to them.
Mr. Chair, that's fair. Like I said, we will check on that, Mr. Chair, as you've offered to do, and we will come back and we will clarify on the names. I would say it's pretty standard process when we put the names forward that the minister may decide to meet with individuals, and it is unfortunate sometimes people do decide to back out if they feel that they are not going to be able to meet the ethical wall obligations.
I appreciate that. I just want to help understand, besides what MP Brock said, I think it's really important to understand when Ms. Vacherian was appointed with her managed conflicts as a testimony, Leah Lawrence, the president, said there was a board member pre-2019. They had stepped back from the organization to recuse himself. But later, when Ms. Vacherian was appointed, it was about a year after she was appointed, the individual came back and said, well, given that direct conflicts are now allowed, I'm going to go back on the board in this organization that was funding a company that he was going for. Now, I asked her who that was, and she said Guillemette was another PCO recommendation, presumably. It was a GIC appointment. And Guillemette loved the conflict allowance so much that while he was on the board, $16.2 million of taxpayer money went to companies he had a conflict of interest in and an investment in. He even admitted that he voted for one of them in committee. He voted for $4 million to a company he owned. So it doesn't seem like the process works on trying to prevent people from abusing and taxpayer dollars in this way that the Prime Minister's office has set up in their clear and transparent way. So why is it that PCO doesn't seem to monitor conflicts of interest once they appoint these people to the board who declare they have a conflict?
Mr. Chair, I would reiterate our role again in appointments. We launch the selection processes, we run the selection processes, we provide advice ultimately to the minister. When an appointment is made, as I think has been explained to some extent, and they become part, a governor and council becomes part of an entity, they then fall, as I would argue, under the responsibility of the organization and ultimately the minister. And I would say in this set of circumstances, from what I understand from the testimony that's been provided to the committee and what the organization themselves had done, they had put in place some robust processes. They were trying to respect, I think, the ethics commissioner's direction.
But they were so robust, so there's no obligation on your appointment process afterwards to see whether or not those who have been identified to have a conflict of interest actually live by the rules. So the robust processes were that 82% of the transactions that the Auditor General looked at, that's 186 of 226 projects, which was a small sample of what this $22 billion organization has given out over the years. 186 of 226 were conflicted. That's 82% of the GIC PCO recommended appointments were voting money for companies they had a conflict of interest with. And there's no obligation. The minister said he didn't have any obligation when before that. He said, PCO told me to do this, which of course means PMO. But there's no obligation to actually follow up when it's an identified conflict of interest to make sure they're not breaking the conflict of interest law.
Mr. Chair, I would reiterate again that our role is to make sure people understand their obligations under the Act, and it is the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner, as set out in statute that was passed by Parliament, who is responsible for interpreting, administering, and adjudicating, which means that he does undertake efforts to ensure that appointees understand their obligations under the Act. And if there is a problem, as we've seen in this set of circumstances, he will investigate and he will make findings.
Mr. Perkins, I'm afraid that is your time. Turning now to Ms.
Everyone has an opinion about Canadian federal politics.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to wrap it up right there, guys. Do you see the tactics that I'm describing? Like, that they're just stalling, doing anything they can to delay these Conservatives getting answers in these committee investigations. Think we're ever going to get our money back? I highly doubt it. Like, you see the way that they're just doing everything they can not to answer questions, not to get to the bottom of it, not to fix the process. It's frustrating to watch, but that's why we have to watch, to learn, and know that it's very important in the next election to get out there and vote. That's it. I'm Aaron. This is Canadian Looney, trying to learn and share what I'm learning about Canadian federal politics right here. Like, subscribe, share, get notified, all those fun things. Please leave a comment. Love the comments. Thanks for watching the video. We'll catch you in the next one. We'll be back soon. Take care.